Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club, Spiritual Edition. And today we are continuing our reading of Flow by Mihaly C. I call him Mr. C. And I don't know why my camera is acting up, but okay, we will continue. So this book was inspired by an animated film I saw earlier this year with my friend. Marina, big shout out to her. It's got the same name, the animated film and the book. So I don't think they are associated in any way with each other, but I thought it was just kind of interesting that they have the same title. And so if you guys want to check out the animated film, it won the Academy Award this year. Congratulations. And I don't think it's in theaters anymore, but you guys can check it out in the streaming section somewhere in the ether, probably Amazon Prime or something like that. Anyways, I will leave the official website link of the animated film in the description box below, and you guys can check it out. It was very well done. I enjoyed it very much. And I'm not a big animated film kind of person. So, um, yeah, very interesting. And so we will continue our reading today of the book Flow, and this will be chapter 10 and part 2. And if you guys have a book, you guys can follow us with your book, or you can follow with us here on the camera. And incidentally, you can check out our other book clubs. We've got spiritual book clubs on Monday, which is what this book is. Um, Although it's not technically spiritual, it's more psychological. But anyways, w- we will be actually starting a new book next week. We're gonna finish up this book this week today. So check that out. And then on Wednesdays we have our book club health edition where we read about health. And incidentally, we are starting a new book as well. We're finishing up the current book and we'll be starting a new book. So check us out, check it out, join us there. And then Thursday, we have our financial book clubs where we read about financial history, things like that. Uh, so check that out as well. And check out our websites. We have monthly newsletters and we've got podcasts that we interview interesting people. We've got merch. And if you're in the local Los Angeles area, we have come join us, visit us at our healing center. Okay, enough of that. So there are some areas where there will be yellow highlights. That means there's a footnote at the back of the book, which we will read. All right, let's get started. Recovering harmony. The consequence of forging life by purpose and resolution is a sense of inner harmony, a dynamic order in the contents of consciousness. But it may be argued, why should it be so difficult to achieve this inner order? Why should one strive so hard to make life into a coherent flow experience? Aren't people born at peace with themselves? Isn't human nature naturally ordered? The original condition of human beings, prior to the development of self-reflective consciousness, must have been a state of inner peace disturbed only now and then, now and again, by tides of hunger, sexuality, pain, and danger. The forms of psychic entropy that currently causes so much anguish, unfulfilled wants, dashed expectations, loneliness, frustration, anxiety, guilt, are all likely to have been recent invaders of the mind. They are byproducts of the tremendous increase in complexity of the cerebral cortex and of the symbolic enrichment of culture. They are the dark side of the emergence of consciousness. If we were to interpret the lives of animals with a human eye, we would conclude that they are in flow most of the time, because the perception of what has to be done generally coincides with what they are prepared to do. When a lion feels hungry, it will start grumbling. and looking for prey until its hunger is satisfied. Afterward, it lies down and basks in the sun, dreaming the dreams lion dream. There is no reason to believe that it suffers from unfulfilled ambition or that it is overwhelmed by pressing responsibilities. Animal skills are always matched to concrete demands because of their minds, such as they are, only contain information about what is actually present in the environment in relation to their bodily states as determined by instinct. So a hungry lion only perceives what will help it to find a gazelle, while a sated lion concentrates fully on the warmth of the sun. Its mind does not weigh possibilities unavailable at the moment. It neither imagines pleasant alternatives, nor is it disturbed by fears of failure. Animals suffer just as we do when their biologically programmed goals are frustrated. They feel the pangs of hunger, pain, and unsatisfied sexual urges. Dogs bred to be friends to man grow distraught when left alone by their masters. But animals other than man are not in a position to be the cause of their own suffering. They are not evolved enough to be able to feel confusion and despair even after all their needs are satisfied. When free of externally induced conflicts, they are in harmony with themselves and experience the seamless concentration that in people we call flow. The psychic entropy peculiar to the human condition involves seeing more to do than one can actually accomplish and feeling able to accomplish more than what conditions allow. But this becomes possible only if one keeps in mind more than one goal at a time, being aware at the same time of conflicting desires. It can happen only when the mind knows not only what is, but also what could be. The more complex any system, the more room it leaves open for alternatives, and the more things can go wrong with it. This is certainly applicable to the evolution of the mind, as it has increased its power to handle information. The potential for inner conflict has increased as well. When there are too many demands, options, challenges, we become anxious. When too few, we get bored. To pursue the evolutionary analogy and to extend it from biological to social evolution, it is probably true that in less developed cultures where the number and complexity of social roles, of alternative goals and courses of action are negligible, the chances for experiencing flow are greater. The myth of the quote, happy savage is based on the observation that when free of external threats, pre-literate people often display a serenity that seems inviolable to the visitor from more differentiated cultures. But the myth tells only half the story. When hungry or hurting, the quote savage is no more happy than we would be, and he may be in that condition more often than we are. The inner harmony of technologically less advanced people is the positive side of their limited choices and of their stable repertory of skills, just as the confusion in our soul is the necessary consequence of unlimited opportunities and constant perfectibility. Goethe represented or Goethe represented this dilemma in the bargain Dr. Faustus, the archetype of modern man, made with Mephistopheles. The good doctor gained knowledge and power, but at the price of introducing disharmony in his soul. Okay, there are a couple of footnotes, so we're going to read that first. The inner life of animals. To what extent animals other than humans have feelings that approach ours has been extensively debated. C. von Uxko, sorry I butchered that, 1921. Recent studies of primates who communicate with people seem to suggest that some of them do have emotions, even in the absence of concrete stimuli, e.g., that they can feel sad at the memory of a departed companion, but the evidence on this issue does not yet appear conclusive. The footnote on the consciousness of pre-literate people. Among many others, the anthropologist Robert Redfield, 1953, or 55, sorry, argued that tribal societies were too simple and homogeneous for their members to be able to take a self-reflective stance toward their beliefs and actions. Before the first urban revolution made cities possible about 5,000 years ago, people tended to accept the reality their culture presented to them without much question, and they had no alternatives to conformity. Others, such as the anthropologist Paul Radin, 1927, have claimed to find great philosophical sophistication and freedom of conscience among quote primitive people. It is doubtful that this ancient debate will be resolved soon. Okay, let me make sure I know where I am. All right. There is no need to visit far-off lands to see how flow can be a natural part of living. Every child, before self-consciousness begins to interfere, acts spontaneously with total abandon and complete involvement. Boredom is something children have to learn the hard way in response to artificially restricted choices. Again, this does not mean that children are always happy. Cruel or neglectful parents, poverty and sickness, the inevitable accidents of living make children suffer intensely. But a child is rarely unhappy without good reason. It is understandable that people tend to be so nostalgic about their early years, like Tolstoy's Ivan Ilyich. Many feel that the wholehearted serenity of childhood, the undivided participation in the here and now, becomes increasingly difficult to recapture as the years go by. When we can imagine only few opportunities and few possibilities, it is relatively easy to achieve harmony. Desires are simple, choices clear. There is little room for conflict and no need to compromise. This is the order of simple systems, order by default, as it were. It is a fragile harmony, step by step, with the increase of complexity. The chances of entropy generated internally by the system increase as well. We can isolate many factors to account for why consciousness gets to be more complex. At the level of the species, the biological evolution of the central nervous system is one cause. No longer ruled entirely by instincts and reflexes, the mind is endowed with the dubious blessing of choice. At the level of human history, the development of culture, of languages, belief systems, technologies is another reason why the contents of the mind become differentiated. As social systems move from dispersed hunting tribes to crowded cities, they give rise to more specialized roles that often require conflicting thoughts and actions from the same person. No longer is every man a hunter, sharing skills and interests with every other man. The farmer and the miller, the priest and the soldier now see the world differently from one another. There is no one there is no one right way to behave, and each role requires different skills. Within the individual lifespan as well, each person becomes exposed with age to increasingly contradictory goals, to incompatible opportunities for action. I think it's action. Yeah, for action. Oops, for action. A child's options are usually few and coherent. With each year, they become less so. The earlier clarity that made spontaneous flow possible is obscured by a cacophony of disparate values, beliefs, choices, and behaviors. Few would argue that a simpler consciousness, no matter how harmonious, is preferable to a more complex one. While we might admire the serenity of the lion in repose, the tribesman's untroubled acceptance of his fate, or the child's wholehearted involvement in the present, they cannot offer a model for resolving our predicament. The order based on innocence is now beyond our grasp. Once the fruit is plucked from the tree of knowledge, the way back to Eden is barred forever. Okay, let's see. Let's read some footnotes back there. Okay. All right. Leo Tolstoy's novella has been often reprinted. See Tolstoy 1886, 1985. That the complexification of social roles has resulted in the complexification of consciousness has been argued by de Roberti, 1878, and by oh, Drahisesco, sorry, butchered that name, 1906, who developed elaborate theoretical models of social evolution based on the assumption that intelligence is a function of the frequency and intensity of human interactions, and by many others ever since, including the Russian psychologist Vygotsky, 1978, and Luria, 1976. Okay. Oops. Okay. All right. Sorry about that, people. Um, all right, onward. The unification of meaning in life themes. Instead of accepting the unity of purpose provided by genetic instructions or by the rules of society, the challenge for us is to create harmony based on reason and choice. Philosophers like Heidegger, Sartre, and Merleau-Ponty have recognized this task of modern man by calling it the project, which is a term for the goal-directed actions that provide shape and meaning to an individual's life. Psychologists have used terms like appropriate strivings or life themes. In each case, these concepts identify a set of skills linked to an ultimate goal that gives significance to whatever a person does. The life theme, like a game that prescribes the rules and actions one must follow the experience flow, identifies what will make existence enjoyable. With a life theme, everything that happens will have a meaning. Not necessarily a positive one, but a meaning nonetheless. If a person bent all her energy to making $1 million before age 30, whatever happens is a step either toward or away from that goal. The clear feedback will keep her involved with her actions. Even if she loses all her money, her thoughts and actions are tied by a common purpose and they will be experienced as worthwhile. Similarly, a person who decides to find a cure for cancer is what she wants to accomplish above all else will usually know whether she's getting closer to her goal or not. In either case, what must be done is clear, and whatever she does will make sense. When a person's psychic energy coalesces into a life theme, consciousness achieves harmony. But not all life themes are equally productive. Existential philosophers distinguish between authentic and inauthentic projects. The first describes the theme of a person who realizes that choices are free and makes a personal decision based on rational evaluation of his experience. It does not matter what the choice is, as long as it is an expression of what the person generally feels and believes. Inauthentic projects are those a person chooses because they are what she feels ought to be done, because they are what everybody else is doing, and therefore there is no alternative. Authentic projects tend to be intrinsically motivated, chosen for what they are worth in themselves. Inauthentic ones are motivated by external forces. A similar distinction is that between discovered life themes, when a person writes the script for her actions out of personal experience and awareness of choice, and accepted life themes, when a person simply takes on a predetermined role from a script written long ago by others. Both types of life themes help give meaning to life, but each has drawbacks. The accepted life themes works well as long as the social system is sound. If it is not, it can trap the person into perverted goals. Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi who calmly shipped tens of thousands to the gas chambers, was a man for whom the rules of bureaucracy were sacred. He probably experienced flow as he shuffled the intricate schedules of trains, making certain that the scarce rolling stock was available where needed and that the bodies were transported to the least expense, at the least expense. He never seemed to question whether what he was asked to do was right or wrong. As long as he followed orders, his consciousness was in harmony. For him, the meaning of life was to be part of a strong, organized institution. Nothing else mattered. In peaceful, well-ordered times, a man like Adolf Eichmann might have been an esteemed pillar of the community, but the vulnerability of his life theme becomes apparent when unscrupulous and demented people seize control of society. Then such an upright citizen turns into an accessory to crimes without having to change his goals and without even realizing the inhumanity of his actions. Discovered life themes are fragile for different reasons because they are products of a personal struggle to define the purpose of life. They have less social legitimacy because they're often novel and idiosyncratic. They may be regarded by others as crazy or destructive. Some of the most powerful life themes are based on ancient human goals, but freshly discovered and freely chosen by the individual. Malcolm X, who in his early life followed the behavioral script for young men in the slum, fighting and dealing drugs, discovered in jail, through reading and reflection, a different set of goals through which to achieve dignity and self-respect. In essence, interesting through reading and reflection, right? So reading is important, changes your life. That's in my just a little side note, in my newsletter, when I introduced the section on book clubs, I talked about that reading can change your life because it rewires your heart wiring in your brain. And so it's a really important foundation. And it's very sad that most people don't read anymore. And I'm guilty of that. You know, I like to watch YouTube and documentaries on YouTube. It's a different medium of education, but you still want to go back to reading because it's a different type of uh, foundation. It's a different type of hardwiring of the brain. Anyways. And it is through reading and education that people are able to lift themselves out of poverty and into, becoming a doctor or a surgeon or a lawyer or something like that. So yes, education is important. Sorry, a little side note there. I got a little squirrel. Let's read that sentence again. Malcolm X, who in his early life followed the behavior script for young men in the slum, fighting and dealing drugs discovered in jail through reading and reflection, a different set of goals through which to achieve dignity and self-respect. In essence, he invented an entirely new identity. Although, oh, sorry, although one that was made up of bits and pieces of earlier human achievements. Instead of continuing to play the game of hustlers and pimps, he created a more complex purpose that could help order the lives of many other marginal men, black or white. A man interviewed in one of our studies, whom we shall designate as E, provides another example of how a life theme can be discovered. Even though the purpose underlying it is a very ancient one. E grew up the son of a poor immigrant family in the early part of this century. His parents knew only a few words of English and were barely able to read and write. They were intimidated by the frenetic pace of life in New York, but they worshiped and admired America and the authorities who represented it. When he was 7, E's parents spent a good chunk of their savings to buy him a bicycle for his birthday. A few days later, as he was riding in the neighborhood, he was hit by a car that had ignored a stop sign. E suffered serious wounds and his bike was wrecked. The driver of the car was a wealthy doctor. He drove E to the hospital, asking him not to report what had happened, but promising in return to pay for all expenses and to buy him a new bike. E and his parents were convinced, and that they went along with the deal. Unfortunately, the doctor never showed up again, and E's father had to borrow money to pay the expensive hospital bill. The bike was never replaced. This event could have been a trauma that left its scar on E, however, turning him forever, turning him into a cynic who would, from now on, look out for his own interests, own self-interest, no matter what. Instead, E drew a curious lesson from his experience. He used it to create a life theme that not only gave meaning to his own life, but helped reduce entropy in the experience of many other people. Many years after the accident, E and his parents were bitter, suspicious, and confused about the intentions of strangers. E's father, feeling that he was a failure, took to drinking and became morose and withdrawn. It looked as though poverty and helplessness were having their expected effects. But when he was 14 or 15 years old, he had to read in school the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He connected the principles in those documents with his own experience. Gradually, he became convinced that his family's poverty and alienation were not their fault, but were the result of not being aware of their rights, of not knowing the rules of the game, and of not having effective representation among those who had power. He decided to become a lawyer, not only to better his own life, but to make certain that injustices such as he had suffered would not occur so easily again to others in his position. Once he had set this goal for himself, his resolution was unwavering. He was accepted into law school, clerked for a famous justice, became a judge himself, and at the zenith of his career, spent years in the cabinet helping the president develop stronger civil rights policies and legislation to help the disadvantaged. Until the end of his life, his thoughts, actions, and feelings were unified by the theme he had chosen as a teenager. Whatever he did to the end of his days was part of one great game, held together by goals and rules he had agreed to abide by. He felt his life had meaning and enjoyed confronting the challenges that came his way. And let's read some of the footnotes there. Okay. All right. The note on Sartre. Sartre's concept of the project is described by Being and Nothingness, 1956. The concept of, quote, appropriate strivings was introduced by Alport, 1955. For the concept of life theme defined as, quote, a set of problems which a person wishes to solve above everything else and the means the person finds to achieve solution. See Mr. C. and Beatty, 1979. The footnote on Eichmann, Hannah Arendt, 1963, wrote an authoritative analysis of the life of Adolf Eichmann. And the footnote on the autobiography of Malcolm X, which is 1977, is a classic description of the development of a life theme. Okay. All right. Each example illustrates several common characteristics of how people forge discovered life themes. In the first place, the theme is in many cases a reaction to a great personal hurt suffered in early life, to being orphaned, abandoned, or treated unjustly. But what matters is not the trauma per se. The external event never determines what the theme will be. What matters is the interpretation that one places on the suffering. If a father is a violent alcoholic, his children have several options for explaining what is wrong. They can tell themselves that the father is a bastard who deserves to die, that he is a man and all men are weak and violent, that poverty is the cause of the father's affliction, and the only way to avoid his fate is to become rich, that a large part of his behavior is due to helplessness and lack of education. Only the last of these equally likely explanations leads in the direction of a life theme such as E was able to develop. So the next question is, what kinds of explanations for one's suffering lead to engetropic life themes? If a child abused by a violent father concluded that the problem was inherent in human nature, that all men were weak and violent, There would not be much he or she could do about it. How could a child change human behavior or human nature? To find purpose in suffering, one must interpret it as a possible challenge, in this case, by formulating his problem as being due to the helplessness of disenfranchised minorities and not to his father's faults. He was able to develop appropriate skills, his legal training, to confront the challenges he saw at the root of what had been wrong in his personal life. What transforms the consequences of a traumatic event into a challenge that gives meaning to life is what in the previous chapter was called the dissipative structure, or the ability to draw order from disorder. Finally, a complex Nugent-tropic life theme is rarely formulated as the response to just a personal problem. Instead, the challenge becomes generalized to other people or to mankind as a whole. For example, in E's case, he attributed the problem of helplessness not only to himself or to his own family, but to all poor immigrants in the same situation as his parents had been. Thus, whatever situation he found to his own problems would benefit not only himself, but many others besides. This altruistic way of generalizing solutions is typical of nitrotropic life themes. It brings harmony to the lives of many. Gottfried, another one of the men interviewed by our University of Chicago team, provides a similar example. As a child, Godfrey was very close to his mother, and his memories of those early years are sunny and warm. But before he turned 10, his mother developed cancer and died in great pain. The young boy could have felt sorry for himself and become depressed, or he could have adopted hardened cynicism as a defense. Instead, he began to think of the disease as his personal enemy and swore to defeat it. In time, he earned a medical degree and became a research oncologist, and the results of his work have become part of the pattern of knowledge that eventually will free mankind of this scourge. In this case, again, a personal tragedy became transformed into a challenge that can be met. In developing skills to meet that challenge, the individual improves the lives of other people. Ever since Freud, psychologists have been interested in explaining how early childhood trauma leads to adult psychic dysfunction. This line of causation is fairly easy to understand. More difficult to explain and more interesting is the opposite outcome. The instances when suffering gives a person the incentive to become a great artist, a wise statesman, or a scientist. If one assumes that external events must determine psychic outcomes, then it makes sense to see the neurotic response to suffering as normal and the constructive response as, quote, defense or, quote, sublimation. But if one assumes that people have a choice in how they respond to external events, in what meaning they attribute to suffering, then one can interpret the constructive response as normal and the neurotic one as a failure to rise to the challenge and as a breakdown in the ability to flow. What makes some people able to develop coherent purpose while others struggle through an empty or meaningless life? There is no simple answer, of course, because whether a person will discover a harmonious theme in the apparent chaos of experience is influenced by many factors, both internal and external. It is easier to doubt that life makes sense if one is born deformed, poor, and oppressed. But even here, this is not inevitably the case. Antonio Gramsci, the philosopher of humane socialism, and a man who left a profound mark on recent European thought, was born a hunchback in a miserable peasant hovel. As he was growing up, his father was jailed for many years, unjustly, as it turned out, and the family could barely survive from day to day. Antonio was so sickly as a child that for years his mother is said to have dressed him in his best clothes every evening and laid him out to sleep in a coffin, expecting him to be dead by morning. Oh, how sad. Altogether, it was not a very promising start. Yet, despite these and many other handicaps, Gramsci struggled to survive and even succeeded in getting himself an education. And he did not stop when he achieved a modest security as a teacher, for he had decided that what he really wanted from life was to struggle against the social conditions that broke his mother's health and destroyed his father's honor. He ended up being a university professor, a deputy in parliament, and one of the most fearless leaders against fascism. Until the very end, before he finally died in one of Mussolini's prisons, he wrote beautiful essays about the wonderful world that could be ours if we stopped being fearful and greedy. There are so many examples of this type of personality that one certainly cannot assume a direct causal relation between external disorder in childhood and internal lack of meaning later in life. Thomas Edison, as a child, was sickly, poor, and believed to be retarded by his teacher. Eleanor Roosevelt was a lonely, neurotic young girl. Albert Einstein's early years were filled with anxieties and disappointments. Yet they all ended up inventing powerful and useful lives for themselves. If there is a strategy shared by these and by other people who succeeded in building meaning into their experience, it is one so simple and obvious that it is almost embarrassing to mention. Yet, because it is so often overlooked, especially nowadays, it will be valuable to review it. The strategy consists in extracting from the order achieved by past generations patterns that will help avoid disorder in one's own mind. There is much knowledge or well-ordered information accumulated in culture ready for this use. Great music, architecture, art, poetry, drama, dance, philosophy, and religion are there for anyone to see as examples of how harmony can be imposed on chaos. Yet so many people ignore them, expecting to create meaning in their lives by their own devices. To do so is like trying to build up material culture from scratch in each generation. No one in his right mind would want to start reinventing the wheel. Fire, electricity, and a million objects and processes that we now take for granted as part of the human environment. Instead, we learn how to make these things by receiving ordered information from teachers, from books, from models, so as to benefit from the knowledge of the past and eventually surpass it. To discard the hard-won information on how to live accumulated by our ancestors, or to expect to discover a viable set of goals all by oneself is misguided hubris. The chances of success are about as good as in trying to build an electron microscope without the tools and knowledge of physics. Okay, let's read some footnotes here. Okay, the note about blueprint of agentropic life themes. The counterintuitive notion, oops, sorry, people. A little wonky here. Okay. All right. The counterintuitive notion that transference of attention from personal problems to the problems of others helps personal growth underlies the work of the developmental psychologist mentioned in the note to page 221. See also Crandall, 1984, and note to page 193. The footnote on Antonio Gramsci. The best English language biography of Antonio Gramsci is by Giuseppe Fiore, 1973. And notes on Edison, Roosevelt, and Einstein. Grotzel and Grotzel, 1962, detail the early lives of 300 eminent men and women and show how little predictability there is between the conditions in which children grow up and their later achievements. And did we read Cultural Revolution? I think we did. So let's read that. Cultural Revolution is another concept prematurely discarded by social scientists in the last few decades. Among the attempts to show that the concept is still viable, C, for instance, Burho, 1982, Mr. C and Massimini, 1985, Lumsden and Wilson, 1981, 1983, Massimini, 1982, and White, 1975. Okay. People who, as adults, develop coherent life themes often recall that when they were very young, their parents told them stories and read from books. When told by a loving adult whom one trusts, fairy tales, biblical stories, heroic historical deeds, and poignant family events are often the first intimations of meaningful order a person gleans from the experience of the past. In contrast, we found in our studies that individuals who never focus on any goal or accept one unquestioningly from the society around them tend not to remember their parents having read or told stories to them as children. Saturday morning kiddie shows on television with their pointless sensationalism are unlikely to achieve the same purpose. Whatever one's background, there are still many opportunities later on in life to draw meaning from the past. Most people who discover complex life themes remember either an older person or a historical figure whom they greatly admired and who served as a model, or they recall having read a book that revealed new possibilities for action. For instance, a now famous social scientist, widely respected for his integrity, tells how when he was in his early teens, he read A Tale of Two Cities and was so impressed by the social and political chaos Dickens described, which echoed the turmoil his parents had experienced in Europe after World War I, that he decided then and there that he would spend his life trying to understand why people made life miserable for one another. Another young boy reared in a harsh orphanage thought to himself, after reading by chance a Horatio Alger story in which a similarly poor and lonely youth makes his way in life by dint of hard work and good luck. If he could do it, why not me? Today, this person is a retired banker, well known for his philanthropy. Others remember being challenged forever by the rational order of the Platonic dialogues or by the courageous acts of characters in a science fiction story. At its best, literature contains ordered information about behavior, models of purpose, and examples of lives successfully patterned around meaningful goals. Many people confronted with the randomness of existence have drawn hope from the knowledge that others before them have faced similar problems and had been able to prevail. And this is just literature. What about music, art, philosophy, and religion? Occasionally, I run a seminar for business managers on the topic of how to handle the midlife crisis. Many of these successful executives haven't risen as far as they're likely to advance in their organizations, and often with their family and private lives in disarray, welcome the opportunity to spend some time thinking about what they want to do next. For years, I have relied on the best theories and research results in the developmental psychology for the lectures and discussions. I was reasonably content with how these seminars worked out, and the participants usually felt that they had learned something useful, but I was never quite satisfied that the material made enough sense. Finally, it occurred to me to try something more unusual. I would begin the seminar with a quick review of Dante's Divina Commedia. After all, written over 600 years ago, this was the earliest description I knew of a midlife crisis and its resolution. Quote, in the middle of the journey of our life, writes Dante in the first line of his enormously long and rich poem, I found myself inside a dark forest. For the right way I had completely lost. What happens afterward is a gripping and in many ways still relevant account of the difficulties to be encountered in middle age. First of all, wandering in the dark forest, Dante realizes that three fierce beasts are stalking him, licking their chops in anticipation. They are a lion, a lynx, and a she-wolf, representing, among other things, ambition, lust, and greed. As for the contemporary protagonist of one of the bestsellers of 1988, the middle-aged New York bond trader in Tom Wolfe's Bonfire of the Vanities, Dante's nemesis turns out to be the desire for power, sex, and money. To avoid being destroyed by them, Dante tries to escape by climbing a hill. But the beasts keep drawing nearer, and in desperation, Dante calls for divine help. His prayer is answered by an apparition. It is the ghost of Virgil, a poet who died more than 1,000 years before Dante was born, but whose wise and majestic verse Dante admired so much that he thought of the poet as his mentor. Virgil tries to reassure Dante. The good news is that there is a way out of the dark forest. The bad news is that the way leads through hell. And through hell they slowly wend their way, witnessing as they go the sufferings of those who had never chosen a goal, and the even worse fate of those whose purpose in life had been to increase entropy, the so-called sinner. I was rather concerned about how the Herod business executives would take to this centuries-old parable. Chances are I feared that they would regard it as a waste of their precious time. I need not have worried. We never had as open and as serious a discussion of the pitfalls of midlife and of the options of enriching the years that would follow, as we had after talking about the Commedia. Later, several participants told me privately that starting this seminar with Dante had been a great idea. His story focused the issues so clearly that it became much easier to think and to talk about them afterward. Okay, let's see if there's any footnote in the back about that. Not quite. Okay. Let's read on. Dante is an important model for another reason as well. His poem is informed by a deep religious ethic. It is very clear to anyone who reads that Dante's Christianity is not an accepted, but a discovered belief. In other words, the religious life theme he created was made up of the best insights of Christianity combined with the best of Greek philosophy and Islamic wisdom that had filtered into Europe. At the same time, his Inferno is densely populated with popes, cardinals, and clerics suffering eternal damnation. Even his first guide, Virgil, excuse me, a dry throat there. Okay, let's read that sentence again. Even his first guide, Virgil, is not a Christian saint, but a heathen poet. Dante recognized that in every system of spiritual order, when it becomes incorporated into a worldly structure like an organized church, begins to suffer the effects of entropy. So to extract meaning from a system of beliefs, a person must first compare the information contained in it with his or her concrete experience, retain what makes sense, and then reject the rest. These days, we occasionally still meet people whose lives reveal an inner order based on the spiritual insights of the great religions of the past. Despite what we read every day about the amorality of the stock market and the corruption of defense contractors and the lack of principles in politicians, examples to the contrary do exist. Thus, there are also successful businessmen who spend some of their free time in hospitals keeping company with dying patients because they believe that reaching out to people who suffer is a necessary part of a meaningful life. And many people continue to derive strength and serenity from prayer, people for whom a personally meaningful belief system provides goals and rules for intense flow experiences. But it seems clear that an increasingly majority but it seems clear that an increasing majority are not being helped by traditional religions and belief systems. Many are unable to separate the truth in the old doctrines from the distortions and degradations that time has added. And since they cannot accept error, they reject the truth as well. Others are so desperate for some order that they cling rigidly to whatever belief happens to be at hand, warts and all, and become fundamentalist Christians or Muslims or communists. Is there any possibility that a new system of goals and means will arise to help give meaning to the lives of our children in the next century? Some people are confident that Christianity restored to its former glory will answer that need. Some still believe that communism will solve the problem of chaos in human experience and that its order will spread across the world. At present, neither of these outcomes seems likely. If a new faith is to capture our imagination, it must be one that will account rationally for the things we know, the things we feel, and the things we hope for, and the ones we dread. It must be a system of beliefs that will marshal our psychic energy toward meaningful goals, a system that provides rules for a way of life that can provide flow. It is difficult to imagine that a system of beliefs such as this will not be based, at least to some degree, on what science has revealed about humanity and about the universe. Without such a foundation, our consciousness would remain split between faith and knowledge. But if science is to be of real help, it will have to transform itself. In addition to the various specialized disciplines aimed at describing and controlling isolated aspects of reality, it will have to develop an integrated interpretation of all that is known and related to mankind, related to humankind and its destiny. One way to accomplish this is through the concept of evolution. Everything that matters most to us, such questions as where did we come from? Where are we going? What powers shape our lives? What is good and bad? How are we related to one another and to the rest of the universe? What are the consequences of our actions? Could be discussed in a systematic way in terms of what we now know about evolution and even more in terms of what we are going to know about it in the future. The obvious critique of this scenario is that science in general, and the science of evolution in particular, deals with what is, not with what ought to be. Faiths and beliefs, on the other hand, are not limited by actuality. They deal with what is right, what is desirable. But one of the consequences of an evolutionary faith might be precisely a closer integration between what is and the ought. When we understand better why we are as we are, when we appreciate more fully the origins of instinctual drives, social controls, cultural expressions, all the elements that contribute to the formation of consciousness, it will become easier to direct our energies where they ought to go. And the evolutionary perspective also points to a goal worthy of our energies. There seems to be no question about the fact that over the billions of years of activity on Earth, more and more complex life forms have made their appearance, culminating in the intricacies of this human nervous system. In turn, the cerebral cortex has evolved consciousness, which now envelops the Earth as thoroughly as the atmosphere does. The reality of complexification is both an is and an ought. It has happened. Given the conditions ruling the earth, it was bound to happen, but it might not continue unless we wish it to go on. The future of evolution is now in our hands. Okay, let's read some of the footnotes back there. Okay, a note on books as socializing agents. For studies on the effects of books and stories told in childhood on the subsequent life themes of individuals, see Mr. C. and Beatty, 1979, and Beatty and Mr. C, 1981. And the footnote on religion and entropy. See, for instance, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's early essay, written in 1798, but not published until 110 years later. Oh, okay, that's German. I don't know how to read that. Der Geist der Christendoms Ansein Schischko. Okay, sorry, butchered that a lot. The spirit of Christianity and its fate. in which he reflects on the materialization that Christ's teachings underwent after they were embedded into a church. And then the footnote on evolution. A great many scholars and scientists from a diverse variety of backgrounds have accepted the belief that a scientific understanding of evolution, taking into account the goals of human beings and the laws of the universe, will provide the basis for a new system of meanings. See, for instance, Burho, 1976, Campbell, 1965, 1975, 1976, Mr. C. and Massimini, 1985, Mr. C. and Rathunde, 1989, Teilhard de Chardin, 1965, Huxley, 1942, Mead, 1964, Medawar, 1960, and Waddington, 1970. It is on this faith that a new civilization may be built. But evolution does not guarantee progress. Nitecki, 1988. Humankind may be left out of the evolutionary process altogether. Whether it will or not depends to a large extent on the choices we are about to make. And these choices are likely to be more intelligent if we understand how evolution works. Okay. In the past few thousand years, a mere split second in evolutionary time, humanity has achieved incredible advances in the differentiation of consciousness. We have developed a realization that humankind is separate from other forms of life. We have conceived of individual human beings as separate from one another. We have invented abstraction and analysis, the ability to separate dimensions of objects and processes from each other, such as the velocity of a falling object from its weight and its mass. It is this differentiation that has produced science, technology, and the unprecedented power of mankind to build up and to destroy its environment. But complexity consists of integration as well as differentiation. The task of the next decades and centuries is to realize this underdeveloped component of the mind. Just as we have learned to separate ourselves from each other and from the environment, we now need to learn how to reunite ourselves with other entities around us without losing our hard-worn individuality. The most promising faith for the future might be based on the realization that the entire universe is a system related by common laws, and that it makes no sense to impose our dreams and desires on nature without taking them into account. Recognizing the limitations of uh, human will, accepting a cooperative rather than a ruling role in the universe, we should feel the relief of the exile who is finally returning home. The problem of meaning will then be resolved as the individual's purpose emerges with the universal flow. And that is the end of chapter 10 and also the end of the book. Wow, thank you so much for sharing this journey with us. If you've stuck with us, excuse me, this far, I really truly hope that you enjoyed the book. And we will see you next time for another book, which will be very interesting. And in the meantime, I hope you guys have a great day. And like I said, check out our other activities as well. Spiritual book club on Monday, health book clubs on Wednesday, financial book clubs on Thursday. Check out our YouTube channel for our past books that we've read. Also check out our newsletters and podcasts and merch on our website and our healing center. Okay, I hope you guys all have a great day and stay warm because it's summertime. Bye-bye.